This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Chinese Premier Li Keqiang delivers the work report to lawmakers, setting no specific GDP growth target for 2020. How local initiatives are helping to contain the spread of the coronavirus across Africa. And what teachers in Nigeria are doing to reach young learners in marginalized communities as schools remain shut. Hello and a warm welcome to Africa Live on CGTN. I'm Lindy Mtongana in Nairobi. Also coming up this hour. Power consumers and businesses in South Africa face a reduced risk of load shedding. And zoos across Tunisia face an uncertain future as revenues dip due to coronavirus restrictions. Well, China is setting no specific GDP growth target for 2020. This according to the work report delivered by Premier Li Keqiang to the National People's Congress. This year's session opened this morning in Beijing after a 2-month delay due to the coronavirus pandemic. Zheng Yibing has more.
A minute's silence to mourn the martyrs and compatriots who died in China's fight against the novel coronavirus. Premier Li Keqiang praised the society-wide efforts to control sources of infection and contain the spread.
Together, we have waged an all-out people's war against the virus.
Premier Li said efforts must be redoubled to minimize the losses resulting from the virus. And he stressed the need for flexibility for targets.
I would like to point out that we have not set a specific target for economic growth this year. This is because our country will face some factors that are difficult to predict in its development due to the great uncertainty regarding the COVID-19 pandemic and the world economic and trade environment.
The Premier said stabilizing employment and ensuring living standards are key. Li Keqiang emphasized that on the way to eradicating absolute poverty and building a moderately prosperous society, no one will be left behind. He said governments at all levels must truly tighten the belt, and China will not let up on any front of its long-term fight against COVID-19, nor will it lose any time in advancing China's economic and social development agenda. Li vows to create the better business environment. The negative list for foreign investment will be significantly shortened, and China will grant great autonomy in reform and opening up to pilot-free trade zones.
We will foster an enabling market environment in which all companies, Chinese and foreign, are treated equals and engaged in fair competition.
Lawmakers will deliberate the bill on reviewing an NPC draft decision on the legal system and enforcement mechanisms for the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region to safeguard national security. The Premier said the central government will adhere to the major principles and policies on work related to Taiwan and resolutely oppose and deter any separatist activities seeking Taiwan independence. A draft civil code will be submitted for final deliberation. It will incorporate provisions on individual rights into the separate section of the code and help deepen the legal protection of personal dignity and individual rights.
In the coming week, China's legislators will review the draft laws, the government work report, and other important issues. They say they will lay a solid foundation for the victory in the ongoing fight against COVID-19 and secure a decisive victory in fighting against poverty and building the moderately prosperous society in all respects. Zheng Yibing, CGTN, Beijing.
Well, not releasing a specific GDP target in its annual work report is a first for China. Many are concerned this will mean the pandemic might have a heavier toll on the Chinese economy. CGTN reporter Ma Ke has more.
It's a break from tradition in a year that has been anything but ordinary. Chinese Premier Li Keqiang did not give a specific economic growth target at Friday's opening ceremony of the country's National People's Congress, which is considered a highlight of the annual assembly. This raised concerns over global economic recovery after the biggest public health calamity of the modern era.
不提目标，是不是说这个我们就不重视？
No specific number doesn't mean there's no agenda nor plan. It doesn't mean we will allow the Chinese economy to take a nosedive. A stable economy is paramount to the full picture. 1 percentage point in GDP growth means 2 million jobs.
Premier Li says the key tasks at hand are securing employment and people's livelihoods. And experts from the State Council Research Office agree.
无论怎么着，今年失业率肯定是要增加的。
The unemployment rate is sure to grow this year, so it's reasonable to lower the expectation for the increase in jobs from last year's 13 million to 9 million this year. The State Council will also expand social security coverage for families in difficulty.
Economists also warn against other factors suppressing economic recovery, like trade frictions and anti-globalism.
其实呢，去年呢是世界经济。
Please don't forget that 2019 itself was already a bad year. Actually, it was the slowest year since the 2008 global financial crisis. In China, we saw fast growth in the first half, but then slower numbers in the second half, during which time global trade friction increased significantly and the market was unsteady. So all these factors have us believe that it's not practical to set a specific GDP goal.
Friday's government work report so is different in the history of the NPC, but the messages were clear. The next stage of governmental work will aim for a steady economic recovery while prioritizing people's livelihoods. 马克 CGTN Beijing.
For more on China's two sessions, we're now joined by Lu Suri in Beijing. Lu, China is setting no specific target for economic growth for 2020. What does this mean, and what were some of the other key highlights of Premier Li Keqiang's address to the National People's Congress?
Yes, Lindy. So China has not set any GDP target for this year yet. This is because, according to Premier Li Keqiang, that the country is going to face a lot of factors that are hard to predict in its development because of the coronavirus impact and also the world economic and trade environment. But then China is also working on a slew of policies and taking a slew of measures to help the country to recover its economy. For example, some other highlights in the work report as well, the country will plan to create 9 million jobs. And this is very good news for the younger generations because in the past few months, because of this major impact of COVID-19, a lot of SMEs, small and medium-sized enterprises got a major hit, and so a lot of people went jobless. So I think this policy is going to help these young people. And another highlight is the deadlines for the government bodies to make overdue payment owed to the private sectors and the SMEs. And this is also good news for the private sectors to help them to recover. Lindy.
And of course, Lu, today was just day one, but what other agenda items should we expect to be on the table in the coming days of the two sessions?
So the country will work on a Hong Kong security law to safeguard the nation's national security, and it's also very important to its political stability. Another draft of civil code will also be submitted, and this civil code is to formalize China's property rights and personal rights. Lindy.
Thank you so much, Lu Suri, joining us there live from Beijing. Well, for Africa, China's two sessions are expected to carry even more significance than usual as the continent looks to benefit from China's experience with containing the spread of COVID-19. CGTN's Daniel Arap Moy spoke to Professor Peter Kagwanja, the founding president and chief executive of the Africa Policy Institute. The institute is a pan-African think tank specializing in policy research on security, governance, and strategic issues in Africa.
Our main interest would be to see how China is planning to deal with helping others to basically contain COVID-19. The reason being, China itself seems to have spectacularly come out of the event, out of the epidemic. The first country to literally get over and contain the epidemic in a very impressive manner. Now, what lessons do we learn from there? What are the policies that China is going to deliberate on in this year's Lianghui, and how are they going to affect us in Africa? So that's what us as policy analysts and advisors of governments and people in government who are making policies in Africa are looking forward to.
The commencement of China's two sessions comes amid great uncertainties brought about by the pandemic.
What are Africa's key expectations from this meeting?
Increasingly, China's support for Africa's humanitarian issues, how to deal with the disasters, how to deal with the diseases. China has been involved in issues of Ebola epidemic on the continent, which really affected from the whole of Central and West Africa.
At a time when the world economy is plagued by the coronavirus pandemic, policymakers in Africa are faced with the same dilemma: how to get the economy back on track amid containment of the virus.
Obviously, the world is going to change fundamentally. China and Africa will have to adjust their cooperation to the new challenges of a world that is really locked in an epidemic, and possibly, you never know, another epidemic in another. So we've got to begin preparing now for that.
But as the COVID-19 crisis unfolds gradually across Africa, a further strengthening of state relations and African governments' engagement with China is taking place and perhaps deepening. China has provided a large amount of medical supplies to Africa and facilitated the purchase of such supplies through commercial channels.
I would argue that this is the time to project China's soft power. This is the moment that the best of China's humanitarian soft power aspects should come out. It is not when everybody is okay. It is when a friend in need is a friend indeed.
Policymakers say the COVID-19 pandemic is likely to be regarded as one of the key historical crises that further cemented ties between Africa and China. Daniel Arap Moy, CGTN, Nairobi, Kenya.
Well, CGTN Africa has traditionally deployed a crew to China to cover these two crucial gatherings, but that won't be happening this year due to the coronavirus pandemic. Instead, just ahead of the start of the two sessions, I sat down with our reporters and discussed their experience of past sessions, the impact of COVID-19 on this year's coverage, and what viewers can expect. Take a look. With us, a very warm welcome to Jane Kio, Ucho Koronko, and Robert Nagila. Robert, let me start with you. In 2017, China expanded foreign media access to the two sessions, and you were the first CGTN Africa reporter to attend and cover the event. What were your thoughts at the time, particularly as a journalist who would have to explain the inner workings of the Chinese political system and their significance to an African audience?
Well, Lindy, first, blow my mind, it did. I mean, I've covered quite a few huge events. I'm talking about the Commonwealth in Sri Lanka, the BRICS Summit in South Africa, and various AU summits. They all pale in comparison. When you talk about the two sessions, as I quickly discovered, you're looking at organization, clarity, focus, scale. Once you've taken all that in as a reporter, you now have to begin looking for comparisons to break this down for your viewers. Why is it important for the African continent? What sort of impact is it going to have here in Africa?
A one-of-a-kind political event indeed. Coming to you now, Jane, you covered the event in 2018. You were right in the thick of things. You traveled to various parts of China. And of course, you were even there at press conferences engaging with top political leaders like Foreign Minister Wang Yi. Tell us about that.
Well, Lindy, it was interesting and very insightful, I would say, in various ways and in different ways. It was not just about understanding China's political system and governance, but it was also more about learning about the country, exactly where it's coming from. Given that 2018, China was marking and celebrating 40 years of reform and opening up. Of course, this is about its rapid economic growth and development. And so this meant a lot of travel out of Beijing. One of my highlights was actually covering the speed train, the fastest bullet train in the world. That's the Fuxing from Beijing to Shanghai. We also got to cover that press conference by Foreign Minister Wang Yi. It's actually one of the major sideline events of the two sessions. And why it's a big deal? It's because he's China's top diplomat. And therefore, during the press conference, he actually gets to articulate and lay out China's foreign policy and external relations.
And Uche, let's come to you now. As Jane has said, the two sessions is also about understanding where China has come from and where it's going. As far as your experience is concerned in 2019, what do you remember most in terms of witnessing China's transformation?
Well, Lindy, I think 2019, the two sessions in 2019 was about consolidating a lot of those moves towards opening up its economy. One thing I did note was there was a great push towards innovation-driven development. Now, we saw the various committees discussing new regulation towards pushing or encouraging innovation across several sectors. We saw them setting up a science and technology innovation board, which was meant to push forward those innovative initiatives in the country. A lot of Internet Plus initiatives as well were put forward. Now, since then, China undoubtedly has sort of led the world in terms of artificial intelligence development. Now, another thing that stood out to me in 2019 was the fact that China was taking a step further to further open up its economy, improve the business environment for foreign investors.
In the context of the coronavirus pandemic, Uche, what are China's prospects in a post-COVID economy?
We know COVID-19 has come with a lot of uncertainty. And for China internally, it's about certainly helping the economy rebound. And externally, it's repairing some of those relationships with countries like the US. So much like the rest of the world, China's prospects will depend on, of course, containment measures and, of course, stimulus.
Let me come to you, Robert. What do you think is likely to happen in terms of China-Africa economic relations in response to COVID-19? Do you think we might see some kind of pause, perhaps, on Belt and Road projects or loans and other deals? Or do you think many of these projects will continue in various sectors?
A pause? No, I don't think so. Perhaps a slowdown initially. Look, COVID-19's had a huge impact on global trade. A lot of economies have more or less shut down, and it's only now that we're beginning to see the reopening of these economies. As COVID-19 has been going on, sub-Saharan Africa has also been devastated by floods. There's been heavy rainfall in this particular area. So a lot of the infrastructure that was already in place has been destroyed. So as countries begin to emerge from the lockdowns and from the pandemic itself, focus is going to be on repairing that infrastructure. And China is going to have a huge hand, not just in financing, but in the construction of that infrastructure. Now, the other area where we expect to see a lot of movement is on Africa's or the continent's health systems. It's generally accepted that across much of the continent, they're very, very weak. And this has been exposed by COVID-19. We had Ebola just before that.
And Jane, coming to you now, China has faced both praise and criticism for its handling of the coronavirus outbreak. Do you expect that Chinese officials may use the two sessions as an opportunity to perhaps dispel myths and rumors and even highlight China's efforts in fighting the virus, not just at home, but indeed globally?
In terms of global response and the accusations and counter-accusations that have been going on, I still expect that to come from the foreign minister's press conference, because this is where we get the journalists asking those hard questions. And of course, China so far has been defending itself. It's issued several statements in light of some of these allegations.
Uche, just how do you expect to see Africa feature in this year's two sessions?
Well, Lindy, I think Africa has been a huge part of China's development agenda, and of course, vice versa. You can't argue with the fact that COVID-19 has sort of disrupted that status quo. But nevertheless, I do think that the Belt and Road Initiative is still ongoing. It is still ongoing. Africa has been a huge beneficiary of that in terms of funding, in terms of infrastructural projects. So I think we will see at this year's two session a move to maybe push forward some of those projects.
It will certainly be very interesting to see just how China makes its mark on the world in its own two sessions political season. Well, let's take a short break. Here's what's still ahead on the program. How local initiatives are helping to contain the spread of the coronavirus across Africa. And what teachers in Nigeria are doing to reach young learners in marginalized communities as schools remain shut.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself. If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
We start in South Sudan now, where 10 cabinet ministers have tested positive for COVID-19. That's according to the Information Minister, Michael Makwe. The ministers had come into contact with a former member of the country's high-level coronavirus task force. The ministers will now be in self-isolation for the next 2 weeks. Health Minister Riek Gaikok was the only person on the task force to not contract the disease. Vice President Riek Machar, who was also on the task force, and his wife, the Defense Minister Angelina Teny, have both tested positive. There are concerns that South Sudan's health system might not be able to handle a large-scale outbreak due to years of conflict. So far, there are 481 confirmed cases in the country. 4 people have recovered and another 4 have died. Meanwhile, the National Institute of Communicable Diseases in South Africa has been at the forefront of the fight against COVID-19. It has been used as the first point of testing for the virus and also validating results for other laboratories. Angela Coppola has more.
The Institute has been testing for the virus since the end of January, when the World Health Organization declared COVID-19 a public health emergency. Concerns are now being raised internationally about a second wave of infections.
We're in our first wave now, and we've moved from just isolated cases related to travelers quite rapidly into quite widespread community transmission. So we're very much in our first wave, and the epidemic curve was flattened, so to speak, probably related to the lockdown, but the cases are, as expected, starting to increase in most parts of the country. We are moving from, I think, focusing on community testing, picking up hotspots, testing people who've got symptoms that would suggest COVID, really into prioritizing now. I think, hospitalized patients, patients with pneumonia, healthcare workers who may have symptoms, selected patients who are going into hospitals have to be the focus of our testing. It really is overwhelming otherwise, and I think we need to prioritize the patients where a result is important for management and for infection control in health facilities.
The health authorities are caught in a difficult position. They need to increase the amount of testing, but there are challenges.
There absolutely is a challenge. You know, we're competing with the rest of the world for reagents, for kits. We would like to move into the cartridge testing, the more near-patient testing with PCR, but there simply aren't enough to go around the world.
While much of the authorities' attention is taken up with fighting COVID-19, there are other priorities.
We need to be sure that we don't neglect our other important disease programs, TB, HIV, malaria, you know, chronic diseases, non-communicable diseases, focuses on COVID, but, you know, the burden of communicable and non-communicable diseases in Africa and South Africa are huge. And so, you know, we need this balance. It's really a tough time.
Testing has become a way of life for most South Africans, and it's going to continue like this into the future until we start managing this virus. I'm Angelo Coppola for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
A joint report by the World Health Organization and UNAIDS is warning about the impact COVID-19 could have on other health services. The report warned a 6-month disruption of antiretroviral therapy could lead to more than 500,000 additional deaths from AIDS-related illnesses in sub-Saharan Africa. CGTN's Lindy Mtongana has more.
When treatment is adhered to, a person's HIV viral load drops to an undetectable level, keeping that person healthy and preventing forward transmission of the virus. When a person is unable to take antiretroviral therapy as prescribed, the viral load increases, impacting the person's health, which ultimately can lead to death. UNAIDS and the World Health Organization say the disruption to health services as a result of the coronavirus pandemic has meant many default on their treatments, and that the sub-Saharan Africa population is particularly vulnerable. Sub-Saharan Africa is home to the largest people living with HIV globally.
Around 500,000 additional deaths would incur if there is a 6-month disruption of services. And treatment, including PMTCT, and viral load testing and condoms were found to be having the impact in that order. I mean, you know, disruptions happen at multiple levels. It could happen at individual level, it can happen at the service delivery level, it can happen at global or national levels.
Malvia says there are countries that are already implementing measures to help people continue treatment.
There are various good stories coming, and we also know that most of the governments are very committed to push and make sure that the excellent gains that they have made in controlling the HIV, reducing the number of new infections, reaching out to female sex workers and MSM and transgender population is not undermined because of this COVID impact.
Here in South Africa, as a result of the emergence of COVID-19 pandemic, the Gauteng Department of Health has observed an increase in the number of TB and HIV patients that have defaulted on their medication, particularly since the lockdown period.
We are using now, the new mechanisms that we have actually learned and that we have introduced with the tracking of COVID. So now part of our tracking and tracing of actual COVID and raising awareness, it's also increasing our tracing and tracking for TB, HIV, and all other non-communicable diseases. So all our mass communication, mass screening and testing activations that we have done them also including that particular service.
The UNAIDS says as part of mitigating this issue, there has to be regional and global cooperation at all levels to ensure that medicine essential supplies are maintained. The organization further asserts that communities must be involved in seeking solutions because decades-long experience in the fight against HIV and AIDS has revealed that when communities are involved, responses are more sustainable and meet the demands of those communities. Lindy Mtongana for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
To Kenya now, where a volunteer is working hard to help curb the spread of COVID-19 by fumigating police stations. No coronavirus infections have been reported among Kenyan police officers. Robert Okubo says that his cleaning company is determined to fumigate and sterilize more than 40 police stations in the country. Okubo says he wishes his team of volunteers could do more, but they lack additional resources and equipment.
The more we take charge of it in our hands, the better the fight will be against corona. So I'm appealing to those that can help. I wish we had more manpower and more machines, but there's a lot we can still do as citizens to help our country.
We urge other Kenyans to follow Robert's footsteps so that they can assist our officers. You know, our officers are always in the front line in dealing this epidemic issue of corona. So if people can come out and assist us, especially in fumigation of the officers, fumigation of vehicles.
Meanwhile, in northwestern Kenya, a Burundian refugee is using his skills to ensure everyone at Kakuma refugee camp maintains proper hygiene. Innocent Haberimana holds a diploma in chemistry, and he makes soap and recently reduced his prices so that every refugee can afford it. This way, Innocent hopes that he can help the government curb the spread of the coronavirus. He is not only supplying soap, but also making and selling hand sanitizer with aloe vera, which he's planted at his workshop and outside his house. The camp in northeastern Kenya hosts close to 200,000 refugees.
Because of this corona, the production was being increased so much because all people now are in need of soap. Currently, because of this coronavirus, the demand which is high, it is hand wash, hand sanitizer, and multi-purpose soap. Coronavirus affected the world, plus this Kakuma refugee camp. Most of the refugees are fearing so much coronavirus. That is why now you can't find more than 3 people who are in the same place.
With schools in Nigeria shut because of the coronavirus pandemic, many are adapting to online learning. But not every school and every pupil can afford the requirement of virtual schooling. CGTN's Deji Badmus now tells us about how teachers are devising alternative ways to continue educating students.
It's a tuition-free school and operates in one of the urban slums in Lagos. All the pupils who attend Comenius Primary School come from disadvantaged backgrounds. The school has been shut down since March, when the Lagos state government ordered all schools closed because of COVID-19. But while many schools are taking to online learning, Comenius cannot because it simply doesn't have the funds, while parents cannot afford computers or mobile data, let alone the cost of electricity.
We don't want to leave the children idle at home doing nothing. We want them to be engaged because they are powerful. Their mind is powerful. They could attract beautiful things. So we don't want them to start attracting negative things in the community, in the society.
Knowing e-learning is not possible for the school and its pupils, Oweye Taiwo and her team decided to take the learning to the pupils at their homes and communities. At this community, the teachers are preparing some of the pupils for the day's lessons. It's a routine before any lesson commences, and the pupils must also wear their face mask and observe physical distancing. The teachers then administer weekly worksheets to the pupils and take them through lessons on various subjects. It's essentially what happens in the classroom, but in this case, there's no writing board.
So we come every Monday, we work. We print out this worksheet. We ensure that we have adequate, numbers of these worksheets to pass around to the huge number of children that we're serving. So teachers, from Tuesday, teachers start going to the homes of these children to pass across this worksheet, and also they get those ones they gave out the previous weeks and for marking. So when they mark, they find a way of getting these things back as well to the children. So this is how we've been juggling. This is how we've been ensuring that these children are learning.
Marking of the worksheets takes place in the school, again with physical distancing observed. The whole process is time-consuming, but the alternative would mean no learning at all for the students.
we want the best for every child because they also count in the growth of our dear nation. But we are hoping that we'll be able to get sponsors, we'll be able to get, funders so that we can buy the necessary digital devices so that these children, can connect to the internet, can connect to e-learning, because there's so much as well to learn online.
Until they get that funding that could make virtual learning possible, Oweya Taiwo and her team say they will continue with their strategy of community schooling until schools can reopen. Deji Badmos, CGTN, Lagos.
Well, turning our attention to other news now, Somalia and Kenya will have to wait 10 more months before taking their maritime dispute to the International Court of Justice. The dispute is over an area of the Indian Ocean believed to contain rich oil and gas deposits. CGTN's Abdulaziz Bilo is in Mogadishu and filed this report.
A much-awaited hearing of a maritime boundary dispute between Somalia and Kenya has been postponed until next year, according to the International Court of Justice. The case has been postponed twice in the past. The hearing, initially slated for June, has now been delayed until March 2021. Somalia has raised objection to the postponement, but says it will abide by the court's decision.
We've raised objection to this decision and insist on the court to carry out the hearing through a video conference. The court has given its verdict and has set a new date for the Maritime case, which we will have to comply with as a result of the coronavirus pandemic.
Previous delays of the hearing were also petitioned by Kenya. A delay last year was granted by the ICJ to allow the Kenyan side to recruit a new defense team. It's been 6 years since Hassan Sheikh Mahmoud, the former Somali president, first took the case to the Hague-based court after the two countries failed to reach a consensus on the maritime dispute.
The maritime case remains where it was almost 4 years ago. The hearing has been postponed on 3 occasions. The government tells us it objects to any postponement but shows no evidence to support the argument. No court can reach an agreement unilaterally. It has to have the consent of both parties.
Both countries claim sovereignty of an area in the Indian Ocean, thought to be rich in oil and gas deposits. Meanwhile, Mogadishu is pushing forward with plans to exploit these resources, with offshore licensing round set to take place virtually in August due to COVID-19 concerns. Up to 7 prospective blocks are up for the bidding process, according to the country's Ministry of Petroleum. However, authorities insist none of the blocks in question are in the disputed zone. The message from Somalia to big oil corporations is that the country is open for business. Authorities here say unlocking the country's oil and gas potential will go a long way in boosting Somalia's economy, providing critical jobs to young people, and end the country's dependence on international aid. Abdulaziz Bilo, CGTN, Mogadishu, Somalia.
Meanwhile, here in Kenya, floods have been displacing tens of thousands of people. Areas bordering Lake Victoria are some of the worst affected. Here's Daniel Arab Moy with that story.
This is Hadundu informal camp for the displaced in Busia County in western Kenya. For the locals, this is a scene unseen before. These villagers lived miles away from Lake Victoria. Months of heavy rains have caused the lake to surge, spreading pain and misery for those who depend on it.
We've been here for 3 weeks now. The water came and swept away our houses and everything we owned. We came here with nothing. We're in great need of assistance, food especially, because we've lost our livelihoods.
This is one of the biggest disasters we've ever witnessed here in Bunyala. It's affected everyone. All our houses are gone and families have been separated. We have no food, as you can see. Everyone is just sitting around. This lady here is cooking chapati because she's trying to make a living with the little that she has. We have no work and we cannot fish. Lake Victoria has had its moments with extreme dry weather patterns and the invasive water hyacinth. This caused the lake to shrink, leaving thousands of acres of dry land that was occupied by unsuspecting locals. Now, with the heavy rains, the lake has reclaimed its space and more.
The lake does not need more water.
So what happens is that the water has to go on the land, and the nearest land that is there is where we live, where we are here. This is a center, almost 10 kilometers from where the initial land was. 10 kilometers radius, can see. The lake has reclaimed much of our land, and now we don't have anywhere to farm, we don't have anywhere to live, to build our houses.
Most people living on the shores of Lake Victoria depend on it for fish. This has in turn created a booming sector that supplies various parts of East Africa. But overfishing has seen fish stocks dwindle, affecting many livelihoods. Experts blame the situation on poor water management policies, although some laws are just but ignored.
The floods, the droughts, the wildfires that we see are as a result of climate crisis. So there is need for collective action, and this needs to be done urgently. We don't have time to waste. Actually, floods does not have to result in disasters all the time. What has been happening is that Kenya has had poor land use regulations, and people are living in floodplains. This increases their vulnerability to flood events.
So far, the current floods have killed over 200 people in East Africa. Kenya has borne the heaviest number of casualties at 94 dead. Uganda, which also shares waters of Lake Victoria, has also been badly affected. Weather experts have warned that the rains could continue until the end of May. Daniel Arap Moy, CGTN.
In news just in, we go to Pakistan, where a plane with 107 passengers on board has crashed. This according to the spokesman for the Pakistan International Airlines. We are looking at live pictures now from Pakistan. The airplane is said to have crashed near a residential area in the capital, Karachi. It was flying from Lahore to Jinnah International Airport, which is one of the busiest in Pakistan. This is a breaking story that has just come in. We will keep following it and bringing you more details in our subsequent bulletins. And these are live pictures coming from Pakistan with that breaking news that a plane has crashed with 107 passengers on board. It has crashed in a residential area in the capital, Karachi. We will certainly bring you more details as they come in on that story. For now, though, let's take a short break. Your business news up next. Coming up, power consumers and businesses in South Africa face a reduced risk of load shedding.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues for taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
China's two sessions political season has gotten underway in Beijing. Meanwhile, Chinese living in South Africa say they're proud of their motherland and they are certain the forum will bring development and progress to China. Chinese in Cape Town have expressed excitement in seeing the successful hosting of the conference, especially at this critical moment during the COVID-19 pandemic. They say they firmly believe that China's social and economic development will recover rapidly under the leadership of the Communist Party of China.
After the outbreak of COVID-19, the Chinese government guided the Chinese people across the country through their arduous efforts to defeat the pandemic. The battle against the pandemic in Wuhan and Hubei has achieved decisive results, as has epidemic prevention and control. Not only has the overall promotion of epidemic prevention and control had great success, but also the economic and social development has achieved positive results.
The motherland has made great achievements in epidemic prevention and control. Under this severe and complex situation, economic development is facing huge challenges. The convening of the 2 sessions in 2020 will be a new starting point for the motherland. Valuable suggestions, very detailed reports have been made on stabilizing employment, increasing income, and solving difficulties.
Meanwhile, South African power utility Eskom says the risk of load shedding has been reduced for winter. This is good news for long-suffering consumers and businesses. Angela Coppola has more.
The utility says it will focus its maintenance plans on 11 of its 15 power stations.
So I'm very much relieved to sort of hear from Eskom now that they've used the lockdown period to do massive catch up on the maintenance. Seemingly, they were projecting 35 days of breakdowns or load shedding before the lockdown period, and seemingly that is now down to less than 3 days under the new scenario. So I think that's if that is indeed true, that is very, very good news for the South African economy.
While the main focus is on making sure that load shedding risk is reduced, Eskom has a far bigger problem. A $25 billion debt burden. It's looking to sell several non-core assets to settle some of that debt.
We are not desperate sellers, so if we get cheeky offers, then we will have to make our plans differently and understand how we take that process forward. So for people who are considering putting in a bid, only serious buyers will be considered, to use second-hand car trading terminology.
While Eskom works on its balance sheet, it's starting to manage its independent renewable energy suppliers.
I think that there is an opportunity for us to request IPPs to look at potentially refinancing. We think that some of the financing arrangements are potentially suboptimal, and that there are opportunities to lower the financing cost and thereby also reduce the costs paid by Eskom to those IPPs.
Eskom is also trying to convince its regulator, NERSA, that it needs a bigger annual increase in its tariffs that it charges its customers.
The bun fights with the regulator and the public in regard to tariff increases is still way from over, and that Eskom is still vigorously going to pursue much higher tariff increases.
Clearly, we have differences that need to be resolved, and this will take time. I'm under no illusion that these are easy matters to resolve. They are challenging, they are complex, the stakes are high, really large numbers are involved in terms of tariff increases, with an undoubted impact on the South African economy on the one hand, but also an undoubted impact on the viability of Eskom.
As South Africa enters that winter season, the likelihood of load shedding is still very present, and it depends on what Eskom does. Of course, consumers also need to come to this particular party. I'm Angelo Coppola for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
To Tunisia now, where since mid-March, all zoos across the country have been closed due to strict coronavirus lockdown measures. The absence of tens of thousands of visitors has had an impact on the revenues of zoos, and it's uncertain when they'll be able to reopen their gates. Adnan Chouachi has more.
Zookeeping, cleaning cages and feeding animals has continued throughout the coronavirus lockdown in Tunisia. The municipality of Tunis has provided all the logistical means to ensure the safety of the personnel, while the prevention measures have been reinforced to protect the animals.
The disinfection of the zoo was done by the Department of Health and Environment Protection at the municipality of Tunis, because the zookeepers have continued working during the general lockdown. The zoo was closed to visitors, but we've provided care for the animals every day.
The lion section has been enlarged Zookeepers say the cubs have grown up in a spacious and healthy enclave. Just like many zoo inhabitants, this white tiger and this rare albino kangaroo require special care. An IFR says that observing animals to check for any health or behavioral issues is part of the daily routine of zookeepers.
If an animal is refusing food, it's isolated in the enclosure. The zookeeper will report the information to the section curator or speak with the vet, and then a decision can be made about what to do to help the animal.
Hundreds of people, especially children who usually gather in this area, have deserted the zoo. According to the vet, the absence of visitors seems unusual to the seal. Zookeepers say they are happy to be at work, despite the zoo being shut during the lockdown.
As zookeepers, we respect the sanitary and social distancing measures. This job is fantastic. Spending many hours per day with animals is a unique experience.
Experts say the COVID-19 shutdown has been a boon for migratory birds. Flamingos are among the species flocking back to lakes across Tunisia. Vets and zookeepers are still working amid the coronavirus lockdown to keep thousands of animals alive. This is the longest time that many zoo animals will have gone without the public, and zoo staff will have to help them transition back to normal life. Adnan Shawishi, CGTN, Tunis.
Well, let's take a short break. Your sports news coming up next. We go to South Africa, where an Orlando Pirates superfan tells us how much he's missing football.
How would you create your legend? On the fields, on the tracks, in the arenas of Africa. Were you born to be a player? Could this moment be yours? Sports Scene. Find your game.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Mandla Sindani is a die-hard Orlando Pirates supporter from South Africa. The COVID-19 crisis, though, has denied this superfan the chance to cheer on the Buccaneers, who were fourth in the ABSA Premiership before the league's suspension, 8 points behind leaders and arch-rivals Kaizer Chiefs. CGTN's CS Du Plessis brings us the story of how Sindani is coping during the lockdown.
Football supporters in South Africa are suffering. No football since March and no sign of the games returning anytime soon is taxing on even the biggest supporters.